Hello and welcome to today's Lorcana Deck Guide. Today I'm walking through one of my favorite decks to come out of Set 3, Amethyst Emerald. Specifically, Amethyst Emerald Hyper Aggro with a few spicy additions thrown in. Let's get into it. As a quick introduction to this deck and the concept surrounding it, card draw and card advantage is very important in Lorcana, and it's a fantastic route towards victory. In a super focused aggro deck specifically, if you can find a way to fold in a good card draw combo seamlessly, it's a recipe for success. With Amethyst and Emerald, we have access to the simple combo of Ursula, Deceiver of All, double singing friends on the other side. It's a natural pairing that results in some really strong card draw. These two colors also come with solid options like the Mim Bounce package, early aggressive characters, and other great Emerald cards as a bonus. These days, this deck sees a lot of attention as a tempo-oriented list that wants to continue its advantage into the mid-game. But my list today is hyper-focused on dominating the early lore race and pressuring the game into your favor right off the bat. Let's break down the deck piece by piece. At the 1-cost slot, we start off with Chernobog's Followers, Creatures of Evil, Maleficent Biding Her Time, and Cursed Merfolk, Ursula's Handiwork. As a hyper-aggro deck, Cursed Merfolk is our primary opener, with Maleficent as backup. She hits just as hard when questing, but doesn't force the discard when challenged like Merfolk do, and they can be quite annoying for your opponent. Chernobog's Followers is our third option. They draw you a new card when they quest, but a lot of the time they'll be used as ink, either on turn 1 or on turn 3 after being bounced back to hand on 2 by Mim Snake. Many players prefer running Olaf or Pascal in this third slot, so if you're curious about their comparison, I'll cover that later on when discussing further options for the deck. Regardless, almost always, if given the choice, Cursed Merfolk is the way to go, adding pressure from turn 1 with its 2 lore and ability to discard opponents' cards. This is amplified further when opponents need to deal with multiple Merfolk on the board. Plus, you can always follow up on turn 2 with Flynn Rider Charming Rogue, who will also chip away at the opponent's hand when he's challenged. There are a few other good options on turn 2 though. First, we're in Amethyst, so Mim Snake is here, a great follow-up to turn 1 questers, bouncing them back to keep them safe. On your second turn, you can accomplish this bounce with Snake, or with Befuddle, which I include 4 copies of, an always underrated action that is still putting in work 3 sets deep. When you're on the play, you can use Befuddle on 2 to bounce your turn 1 as mentioned, and you have another ink left over to play it right back out, starting off your aggro rush to 20 with Force. But Befuddle is also great as a defensive tool that can cripple your opponent's options. In particular, hitting a lone enemy snake halts all of their momentum going into turn 3, which also protects your characters on board in many scenarios. You can also hit cards like the Queen, Smee, or even a timely Popsicle for some impact. But Befuddle is also an inkable card and will often be utilized in that way, which is just fine. Another turn 2 character that's a great Befuddle or Madam Mim target is Pinocchio Star Attraction. Now this is a super aggressive deck, but I only run 2 copies of this card. That's all you really need as a backup lore source, and you'll notice I don't rely on the Pinocchio plus Arthur combos in this particular list. But 2 copies can be really nice against any non-steel decks. In particular, Ruby Sapphire can really be punished with this card on turn 2 if they don't find or don't run their Rush Queen of Hearts as an answer. Finally, for our last 2-cost character, we have 4 copies of Ursula Deceiver. She's a great anti-song tool, as you'll see later in the gameplay, really a tech card into Ruby and Steel, but she can also hit other songs too, like Friends on the Other Side and Let It Go. In general, we won't be prioritizing her on turn 2 unless she's the only option we have. Our other 2 drops are clearly better aggro choices, plus Ursula is best played going into your opponent's turns 5 or 7, or before they shift to sing those key songs with their characters. As a quick example, you're much more likely to hit an opponent's Be Prepared right before they hit 7 ink. At this point, they've probably drawn several cards, drawing into the Be Prep, and are ideally relying on it to shut down your aggressive game plan. If you can take them out during these vital moments, it can be game over. So you can see just why she's so devious. Moving on to 3-cost characters, there's even more powerhouse choices here. Mim Fox is an obvious one. No joke, I think she's in the conversation for the most impactful character in the game. And that's only been affirmed further in Set 3. Not only can she bounce to protect your characters or bounce your Merlin Goat, but she's vital for taking down big threats from both opposing characters and comboing to take down important locations like the Queen's Castle. This deck also runs 4 copies of Maleficent Sorceress, another classic Amethyst staple. This list doesn't run any Rabbits or Cuscos, so we definitely need to max out our Maleficents here. On the Emerald side of things, Kit Cloudkicker's here is a fantastic disruptive tool. He can toss back valuable enemy characters like Doc, Morph, Ursula, Tiny Tink, and other shift targets. This swing and board tempo can completely shift the momentum of the early game, or at the very least add a speed bump to your opponent's response to your quest pressure. Even after turn 3, Kit finds a ton of utility, bouncing opposing characters like Hiram, Belle, Prince Eric, and more. Let me interrupt real quick and show an example of Kit Cloudkicker at work. Take a look at this position after turn 2. First of all, I do have a hilarious triple Merfolk opening, but it's my opponent's turn and they play out Ursula. Surely they plan to take down one of my cursed Merfolks next turn. But all I have to do here is quest up to 8 and play out Kit, bouncing their challenge threat back to hand. In other words, if they don't have an action or song answer to my characters here, I'm guaranteed to reach lethal within 2 turns. In fact, I can reach well over 20 lore before they can even respond. Next turn, I'll just quest, adding another 7 lore up to 15, and even if they play out another character as a response, I have another Kit waiting to bounce anything under 2 strength. And my opponent even knows this and sees it coming. They saw my hand when they played out Ursula. Now I am up against Steel and my opponent could play multiple characters, but I guess they don't have the necessary response, so they surrendered the game with Kit Cloudkicker clearly taking the MVP. Up next, rounding out the 3-cost characters is Ursula, Deceiver of All. She's a core piece of the deck here, able to double cast any song she sings, throwing it at the bottom of the deck as payment. This deck has 3 songs for her to play with. The first is Friends on the Other Side, a staple for fantastic card draw. Our second song is The Boss is on a Roll, the underrated star of the show. It provides a strong scry ability that really opens up the skill expression of this aggro deck. You can plan several moves ahead in advance using this song, scouting more than just 5 cards deep if you sing this with Ursula and toss some of the first 5 to the bottom. Plus the card comes with some bonus lore, I guess I'll take it. And our third song included is a couple copies of Bibbidi Bobbidi Boo. This card is here to unlock some unexpected value from when-played characters like Ursula, Maleficent, Kit, Merlin Goat, and more, all utilizing it. Speaking of Merlin Goat, he's our lone 4-cost character in the deck, rounding out the list, and he needs no introduction. Beyond him, we don't bother going into 5 or 6 ink cost here. There are some fantastic versions of this deck that lean into the mid-game with some great tempo picks, but this version is acutely tuned for explosive power in the early game. It's one of the most capable decks capped out at 4 ink available, providing a ton of flexibility and combos that can come out super early with a ton of impact. This deck is lean and dangerous with more than one tool that can really surprise players. It's worth reiterating that cards like Befuddle are really strong and underutilized, and I think The Boss is on a Roll has a lot of room to shine and hasn't been given the chance by a majority of players. I can't recommend this list enough, especially for aggro deck enjoyers. Now before we jump into some gameplay, let's address some different card options. This will include some notable omissions and why I prefer to leave them out or replace them. First up, if you messed around with Amethyst Emerald in Set 2, you'd remember that cards like Ray, Tinkerbell, and even Peter Pan's Shadow were very powerful. But in Set 3, thanks to the introduction of Maui's Fishhook, Madame Medusa, then along came Zeus, and more, evasives aren't quite as threatening. Ray folds easily to all those cards, just like Surfer Mini, and when there's no Ray or Mini, you don't have to include tech cards like Peter Pan's Shadow or Tinkerbell. But I wanted to quickly mention them here because they have historically been good cards for the deck, and I could see them returning in future sets as the meta shifts, so keep them in your back pocket if you decide to pick up this deck. Now moving on from those previous format picks, as I mentioned earlier, there are a ton of tempo cards that are very good in this deck right now. From Rafiki and Merlin Crab as defensive choices to the mid-game powerhouse of Genie. These are all really strong choices but get cut in favor of a hyper aggro playstyle. Even top-tier card draw from Merlin Rabbit and the Queen's Castle gets benched this time around. Adding these back in isn't bad by any means, but I really like the consistency and speed I get out of my focused list here. Some other options are available at the 1-cost slot. In addition to Cursed Merfolk and Maleficent, who make up the central 8-card backbone here, I opt for 4 copies of Chernobog's Followers. These are chosen over the other choices of Olaf or Pascal. Olaf is clearly the better choice against Teeth and Ambitions and Steel decks, and Pascal is quite annoying against pretty much everything else. But I like the flexibility of the Followers. They help with early card draw, which rounds out the deck, especially with rabbits and Cusco's being cut. And even if I don't utilize their ability, they can be bounced and inked with Snake, just like any other inkable 1-drop. And as I mentioned before, you'll often ink this card anyways in favor of the Merfolk or Maleficent opener. For some final considerations, Mother Knows Best is a great choice in place of Bippity Boppity Boo. It accomplishes a similar role to Kit by bouncing opponent threats back into their hand, and it can be super impactful when sung by Ursula. Floodborn Yzma deserves some mention here. She provides some flexible utility as either a card draw tool or removal, and she's been rapidly growing in popularity as a non-Ruby removal character. Her 6 ink cost is a bit out of the range of this list though. Another option from Emerald that's a bit uncommon is Lucifer. He can be an absolute menace, especially when bouncing him in with Madame Mims or Bippity Boppity Boo. I've played with him quite a bit and he's very fun, just not quite as core aggro as I'd like to show off today. Finally, Spellbook is a very, very good choice here. I think Spellbook is super good in the format right now. Many players are still refusing to splash in item removal, and Spellbook can really punish them for that. So keep this one in mind, especially against Ruby Amethyst. But with that, the complete list and several options have been covered, so let's dive into a couple games and see how this deck runs. This first game I want to show is against Amber Steel. This is a tough matchup for any aggro deck, this included, so here's an example of how I like to navigate the matchup. In the opening hand, I have several options for turns 1 through 3, and you'll notice if you play this list that this is pretty easy to find with such a low to the ground deck. Normally I would mulligan a few cards back to find some card draw, mainly friends on the other side, especially since I already have Ursula. But in this case, I keep my entire hand actually. I figure my opponent will likely want to play an early Whole New World anyways, so I'm happy with the guaranteed inkables I have in hand. I am going first, so I ink one of my 2 kits and play out Cursed Merfolk. My opponent plays out Cinderella, and my best choices here as a response would be Befuddle or Snake, but I play with the hand I'm dealt, adding Pinocchio to the board. I did draw into the friends on the other side last turn though, which is a great combo with Ursula, but my opponent promptly removes it from my hand with the Bare Necessities. Then they take down Pinocchio with Strength of a Raging Fire. You can see why Steel can be so oppressive for this and other aggro decks. It's turn 3 though, so I can either bounce Cindy with Kit, or just take it down with Fox, which is what I do. I keep Ursula in my hand over Kit, as my goal here is to find another friends on the other side, or the bosses on a roll to set up my next few turns. My Madame Mim Fox gets taken down by their Storm, so I decide to flood the board a bit. I need to lay down this pressure now if I can. Chernobog's Followers can draw me a card, and the others can just quest out on at least 1 turn before Grab Your Sword can be played on 5. I am pushing myself quite thin though, especially against Steel, so I'll need to find some more gas soon. The opponent takes out one of my questers, and unfortunately we don't get a lot to work with on my side. I quest and draw a second Befuddle, and then I play one of them, but it doesn't actually accomplish much here. Definitely a mistake by me to not just hold that or ink it. My opponent plays another removal song on their turn, which is annoying, but they've used a lot of their ammo really early on here. I play out my Ursula and pass, ready to see what they have next. Robin Hood is played out next, and it's clear that next turn, if they had a whole new world, they would sing it with him. But I draw into my small Ursula, and even though I kind of want them to make us draw cards next turn, I decide to spoil their plans and enter a top deck showdown. After all, I am up in lore here, and they've used a lot of their removal already. I bounce back Ursula to keep her safe from Robin Hood and ready to go in future turns. After their double flutes go down, I play out my hand, and now all the cards are out on both sides. Let's see who can stabilize first. My main goal is to take out Robin Hood if possible, even if I have to 2-for-1 him. Ideally, they would have to hard cast a whole new world for us both after that, rather than getting it out by singing. They decide to take down Snake here before inking and passing, and I have to decide if I want to commit 2 characters into taking down Robin Hood, and I think I do, but first I draw off Chernobog's followers questing, just in case I can find a better option. I challenge in with my characters and take down Robin Hood, and now I can toss out my 2 Flynn Riders and their Cindy can't answer them on her own. This game has been a bit slow, but you can see how each choice to halt the Steel Song deck from doing its thing just results in the continued march towards 20 lore. Sometimes games are like this, and this deck has the ability to wake up and move quickly once given the chance. Here they have to play out their Rapunzel. It seems odd, but it's vital for them to have 2 damage on board, ready to take down one of my Flynns when they quest. Otherwise, I'm threatening to go up to 19 lore within 2 turns all of a sudden. I use friends to draw into Befuddle and Pinocchio, and the temptation here is to ink and play Pinocchio out on board. But remember, if they can't take down even one of my Flynn Riders, I'm in a great spot here. Again, they've used a lot of their song removal already, and they're nearly out of cards in their hand, especially considering challenging Flynn would force them to discard even further. So I use Befuddle to toss Cindy back, and this is definitely the right move. Back on their turn, they play out their hand, then challenge in with Rapunzel but can't banish my threats. Now it's back to me and I can go to 19 as discussed, and I find the final piece with the bosses on a roll. Any one of my 8 copies of Boss or Merlin Goat would have done it there for me with a little luck. Not a perfect game by any means, but a decent example into a bad matchup. Both sides had some awkward moments and had to rely on the heart of the cards a bit, but that's how it goes some games, and like I said, this deck can really turn up the heat quickly with its aggressive lore potential. Let's look at another matchup here, this time against Ruby Sapphire Item Control, another popular and powerful deck in the meta. In this matchup, you can play super fast. Often they'll spend a few turns setting up Popsicle, Fishbone, and so on as they aim to ramp up and draw cards. We just have to look out for early rush characters that are tech choices against decks like ours. I throw back my uninkable card and keep the rest. I have a decent turn 1 and 2 into a ton of card draw, which will be nice as I'll need to keep up with the card draw potential coming out from their Hiram. They start out with a Popsicle as expected, and I opt to not use the follower's ability and instead use them to bounce in my Snake. This isn't the ideal Hyper Aggro opener I'd like, but that's okay. My opponent inks their 2-drop and passes, which is interesting. Perhaps they have a lot of uninkables in hand. Regardless, I play out Maleficent, drawing a card and setting up to sing Friends on the next turn. It is turn 3, so I expect a ramp option from the Sapphire deck, and they have one with their Detective Mickey. Not as strong as a Fishbone Quill, but it's actually good in response to my particular deck, able to take out 1 willpower characters. On my turn, instead of singing Friends, I sing the Bosses on a Roll to plan out my next few turns. After some thought, I decide to keep almost everything at the top of my deck. I arrange to draw Ursula Deceiver of All first, so she can sing Friends herself. Then I plan for Fox next, to take down Mickey, or threaten a McDuck Manor since I saw them ink a copy earlier. Finally, I plan to draw Ursula Deceiver of All and finish with Merlin Goat. I already have 1 small Ursula in hand, but having multiple is great for taking out opponents' Be Prepareds, and as you'll see right here, I'm gonna need all the help I can get if I want to take them all down. They have 3 in their hand right now. In fact, I go ahead and bring back Ursula right away with Befuddle. I now have an evil plan to take them down. I just saw my opponent's hand, so I know they have Medusa, Mickey, and Fishbone here, along with their B preps. They decide to go with Detective Mickey, ramping up to 6 ink, no doubt ready to drop their nuke next turn on whatever I decide to play out. But I know their plans, and I'm ready to counterattack. I play small Ursula, taking out the second B prep, and I go ahead and sing Friends early now, drawing into my other small Ursula to finish out the triple kill. Now, unless my opponent can draw into their 4th B prep, or string together multiple Medusas and Hades, I should be able to build up a strong board from here. Remember, I stacked my deck with the Bosses on a Roll there, so I knew I could draw into the Ursula there with the Friends on the other side. A super fun sequence to shut down their B preps. Here I know my opponent has Madame Medusa in hand, and they indeed play her out to take down one of my characters. Back on my turn, I clear out the Mickeys and play out Merlin Goat. After Medusa challenges in and Fishbone comes out, I decide to sing with Goat before bouncing it back to my hand with Fox, who can take down Madame Medusa. I know I have Ursula in hand for a potential double sing of Friends, but I'm trying to move quick here, so I opt to sing with Goat. If I can keep up the tempo and strike before my opponent stabilizes with their own card draw, I can close out the game within only a few turns. I finish out my turn by scouting the opponent's hand with Ursula once more, and they have a lucky dime. I have to keep that in mind moving forward. I draw into the Bosses on a Roll next, so I play out Ursula, ready to sing it twice on the next turn. The response is Scar rushing out, which is a great draw for them. Defensive against me, but also a decent target for Lucky Dime. I have a good draw too though, finding another Friends, and I decide to sing that with Ursula instead of Boss. I have a few different lines as options now, and I decide to bounce Ursula for ink, then play out Merlin Goat. Now that I have a Snake and Fox in hand, I can threaten around 8 lore or so over the next 2 turns if Merlin survives here. With no targets to hit, Scar quests and then doubles down with Lucky Dime for 2 more lore, before being healed out of Fox range with the Popsicle. Back on my turn, I quest both characters, then bounce Goat for 1 more lore. Now I can hardcast Boss and plan out my route to 20. I have a lot of choices to make, but it doesn't matter all too much here. Unless my opponent finds their last Be Prepared, I should already have lethal in hand. I decide to put Bippity on top with Merfolk up next just in case, and play out my Pinocchio to set up lethal. My opponent scouts with Develop Your Brain potentially for their last B prep, but has to settle for Maui, who takes down Madame Mim Fox. After that, I quest and can play Goat, and can bounce him with either Bippity or Fox for the victory. Definitely a great game. That match was an incredible display of Ursula Deceiver taking down strong songs, and the bosses on a roll was vital to orchestrating the entire play. I love how it can unlock some more drawn-out strategies down the horizon in an aggro deck that would otherwise be a bit constrained with turn-to-turn tactics. If you guys want to see more of this deck, let me know down in the comments. Make sure to like this video as well, and even share it if you'd like. It really helps push the video out to broader audiences, and I love introducing Lorcana to new players. But that's all I have for today's video. If you're curious about other matchups, this deck does do well against other aggro decks. It can really surprise and shut down Ruby Amethyst control. As expected, it does struggle against steel decks, although they aren't an impossible fight, as we saw in Game 1. Try it out and show your friends why Emerald is definitely still in the conversation this set. But with that, thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time. Peace.